Tipping culture. So tipping culture is something that we've discussed on this platform before. We've debated about it, but it's much different here than it is in other countries. And it's really starting to hit a headwind now that we have a lot of people from a lot of different countries, and we're basically a melting pot here in the United States of America. It's kind of like a culture war. Make sure y'all hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications.
You ready or you need more time?
No, we're ready. Sometimes my kids tell me, "Mom, bring me something." They go, okay.
You must be down there in Miami. Got to be down there in Miami. That's a Miami thing over there.
Not today because Mom no make money today.
Hello, ladies. How are you?
Lupe is a server at Cisco's restaurant Bakery and Bar in Austin, Texas.
Oh, Texas.
One of many workers around the country who makes the federal minimum wage for tipped workers, which is $2.13 an hour.
$2.13 an hour. Make you appreciative of that 32 and then that 20% raise that go on top of that. You making about $40 an hour, and then you get overtime time and a half, and then double time on Sundays, and then you get triple time. Some of y'all be getting triple time on holidays. Triple time. $2.13 an hour. It make you think differently. You hustle a little differently. These people get up and they go to work every single day, and they basically are interdependent on tips in order to survive. I seen a chick get some of the best service ever the other day, and the girl, it was a black girl, she left her $1. Bill had to be $100 at least. Now, my bill was only about $45, and I usually tip sometimes, depending on how I'm feeling that day, especially if the bill is relatively low, like $45. That means I went out by myself instead of went out with somebody else. You know what I'm saying? I'll usually match it. So whatever it is, or I'll just do the difference and go it up to $100. So let's say if my bill is $45, I'll tip $55, and then my bill is just $100 because that's what I expected to spend that day anyway, right? So I'm going to give her whatever the difference is, and then I'll walk out before they even see what the tip is so that, it make their day a lot of times. You cover for a lot of the people, and I'm really, really blessed. And that's just how I like to move. That's just my personal preference. I'm not telling anybody how it is that they do. But at the very least, I don't even care if the service is horrible. I usually tip at least 20% minimum, at least 20%. But this puts a whole new perspective on things when you understand that people are only making $2.13 an hour. It's crazy.
Rate that's been in place since 1991.
There's no real economic theory that came up with $2.13 an hour. It's just no good reason that we haven't moved away from that.
There are about 5.5 million tipped workers in the United States.
Nobody's making you work as a tipped wage employee.
While restaurant owners across the country might want to be paying their employees higher wages, some, like the owner of Cisco's here in Austin, Texas, say they just simply can't afford to do so.
At the end of the day, if we were to increase our minimum wage internally, we have to then pass that off to the customer, which then likely probably tips less.
Wages across the economy, in the lower third of the economy, have been artificially suppressed for way too long. If you want.
And that's the thing that people don't understand. Listen, I understand both sides of the argument. You come from a different country. You're not necessarily the tipper. You believe that, hey, they should pay their workers more money. Or what do you think that money is then coming from? It has to get passed on to the people. So essentially, you're going to pay for it in one way or another, except for the actual wage. Let's say, for example, the Waffle House employees is advocating for $25 an hour. Waffle House employees are advocating for $25 an hour and security. So how much do you think prices have to be raised in order for you to actually be able to pay all of the Waffle House employees $25 an hour? It has to be passed on to the consumer. It has to. And so usually if you see an establishment that say that, oh, we don't accept tips here or something like that, then you also see a price reflection or it reflected in the price itself. You cannot trust people. And this is one of the reasons why tipping culture is bad. You cannot trust people to be commensurate with what the economy or what you know what I'm saying, what is happening as far as trying to bring these workers up to and do it yourself. They then depend on the business owner to do it. If the business owner doesn't necessarily do it, then they say you should have paid more money to the worker. If the business owner go out of business, oh, well, that's just capitalism. It's not my fault. But then y'all want to live in a society where you got more socialism and everybody is equal pay for equal rights and take the business owner and take all of their money and whatever, so on and so forth, eat the rich. Most people that have a restaurant, most people that have a business, most people that have these server jobs, or most people that work for a business owner that have these establishments are not rich. Most real estate holders are usually one or two properties or whatever, and they may have a little bit of cash flow after they pay their mortgage. Most of the time, they are not rich. Even if they are rich on paper, they do not make enough money for them to be able to go and buy and live the lifestyle that you guys really think that they are living out here just because they say that they're a business owner. That's a fact.
People to work in these jobs, we have to pay them and not force them to rely on tips.
While some states have set their own minimum wages and the minimum wage for tipped workers is higher than the federal requirement, it's often not a living wage. 43 states have a lower minimum wage for tipped workers than non-tipped workers.
I hate that term, livable wage. What is a livable wage? What is a livable wage? I don't know what a livable wage is.
Meaning the percentage you're tapping on that tablet might not just be a thank you, great job, but instead, what brings that worker to making minimum wage.
A tip should be what a tip was always meant to be. A small amount on top, a gratuity.
Matt Cisneros' grandfather, Rudy Cisneros, opened Cisco's Restaurant, Bakery, and Bar in 1950 in Austin, Texas, one of 16 states that adhere to the federal minimum wage for tipped workers. Here's how it works. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour, but if you're a tipped worker, it's $2.13 per hour, also referred to as the sub-minimum wage. The difference between the two, $5.12, is called a tip credit. If a worker doesn't receive $5.12 an hour in tips, the employer is responsible for paying them that difference. That's the law.
Most consumers have no idea that every time you tip in a restaurant in most states, it cuts against the worker's wage, rather than being something on top of the wage.
Lupe, who's been working at Cisco's for 10 years, makes the federal sub-minimum wage of $2.13 an hour. She works alongside her mother-in-law and cousin. She told us while there are days when she makes only $30 in tips, she typically makes about $200.
It's difficult knowing if somebody goes home not making a lot of money. You can have a good day at work being a banker, and you can have a bad day at work. The same goes for a pharmacist or anyone. Wages are fluid, but I think if you work hard, you're gonna get tipped more.
Cisneros says when he and his partners took over the restaurant in 2017, it wasn't profitable.
Wasn't something that we bought being like, oh, we've got some honey hole here. We bought history that we knew continued to live. We're here to ensure everybody has a very fair, livable wage and can go home to their families and look in the eyes and be proud of where they work.
Between 2018 and 2022, annual revenue nearly doubled. Their goal is a 10% net profit margin.
So what is a 10% net profit margin? Well, let me see what they're going to say real quick.
Percent is a lot higher than a lot of other restaurants. Why not raise the wage?
There's months that we don't get anywhere near that margin. It's a little bit more of chess that we're playing. So our revenue is not what a lot of restaurants are, right? So if you're at a barbecue place, you're probably doing $10 million a year in revenue. Like, while they might operate on a lower margin, they still probably net a lot more than we do. We have to ensure that our margins are around where they are. Otherwise, like, this business is not functional.
In 2020.
So what he's basically telling you is that net profit margin doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. So let me break it down to you from a C student's perspective, okay? Net profit margin may not be as high at other restaurants, but you may have a barbecue place that does, for example, $10 million in revenue, right? So let's say that their net profit margin is 4%, but they do so much revenue that they make more money than a smaller restaurant that does less in sales. So let's do the math. $10 million. Well, I don't know any places that's doing 10. I don't know any restaurants that's doing $10 million. Let's make it more reasonable. Let's say $2 million, right? Let's say that they do $2 million in gross revenue, right? $2 million in gross revenue. Well, 10% of that would be $200,000. 5% of that is $100,000 net revenue profit. So that means that you have to sell $2 million worth of stuff in order to net $100,000 in profit. That's after employee expenses. That's after rent. That's after insurance. That's after whatever the product is that you sell, right? Everything all included cost you $1,900,000 in order for you to make $100,000 in profit. Now, let's say you take him, right? And let's say that they do $400,000 in sales, because often at times, especially if it's a breakfast spot or it's a spot that sells cheaper food, like, Little Small Burgers or Coney Island or something like that, and the cost of doing business there is a lot different. Let's say that they do 400. Let's make it round. Let's say that they do $500,000 in revenue. Well, a 10% margin at a restaurant, which is more realistic, that's doing $500,000 in revenue, may be profitable, but at a 10% margin, they're only making $50,000. 10% profit margin, $50,000. And then you got to go through and do the taxes and everything like that. So if you're making $500,000 in sales throughout the year, and then you wind up doing a 10% profit margin after all expenses, that means that you're generating about $50,000, right? If you're doing $2 million in revenue and you do a 10% profit margin, then that means that you are making $200,000 in profit after all expenses, and you still taking a chance, you taking a risk, you got to reinvest in your restaurant, so on and so forth. If you do a $2 million in sales, but you have a 5% profit margin because you wanted to lower the cost, you wanted to make it more accessible, and then people spend more money at your restaurant, then that means that you're making $100,000 in net profit, whereas the place that's selling $500,000 and stuff, then they're only making $50,000 in net profit. So then you say, and this is the thing that people don't truly understand because they don't understand the cost of doing business. They've never actually built the business. They don't know what payroll is like. Sometimes you have good weeks. Sometimes you have bad weeks, right? Sometimes it's a holiday and it's booming. Sometimes it's not, or whatever, and the power go out, whatever, right? So then the people say, well, you only paying these people this amount of money, right? And y'all doing $500,000, y'all doing $2 million in sales. Well, we got a 5% net profit margin, right? Or a 7% net profit margin, or 8%, even in 10%. Why don't you pay all of them a livable wage? Everybody in there should be making $50,000, $60,000 a year at least. Well, that completely eats up almost 100% of my profits. Because if I raise the prices, I may not necessarily do more in sales because more people won't be able to afford what it is that we selling, which then limits the amount of money that we gonna make. Even though we got higher prices, we try to pass that cost over into the consumer, but it doesn't necessarily translate into profitability from the business. So what I'm trying to teach you guys and what I'm trying to tell you guys is that the reason why certain things still exist within a culture is because it is conducive for whatever is happening in that economy. If you are in the restaurant business and the culture is A, B, C, D, and E, that profit margin is then determined by the entirety of what it costs you in order to continue to run the business, right? The price of success is not just buying the chicken for $1 and selling it for $2. You might have to sell it for $6. And the reason you got to sell it for $6 is because you got to take into account all of the other things it costs in order to even be able to put that chicken inside of the fryer, all of the oil, all of the cleaning, all of the employees, all of the taxes, all of the insurance, all of the rent, all of the different things, the construction costs, so on and so forth. The possibility of things going wrong, inspections, everything, it doesn't necessarily translate just into profitability unless you bake the entire cost into it, which you then have to pass over into the consumer. So what he's basically telling you is that we don't really do that much in sales. So a 10% profit margin doesn't necessarily translate into being able to give everybody a big old raise in order to have a livable wage. All right, let's continue.
Otherwise, this business is not functional.
In 2022, labor alone accounted for nearly half of the restaurant's total costs.
And they don't even pay them. They don't even pay them but a fraction of it. But labor costs them almost half of all of their operating costs.
2022, labor alone accounted for nearly half of the restaurant's total costs. Cisneros told me he and his partners have never taken out a salary from the restaurant. He has a full-time job as the founder and president of Backyard Ventures, an advertising partnerships business.
This is to feed all of the families that work within these walls.
So he's never taken a salary, and he's still working a full-time job. But then he's still operating and he has partners.
And continue the lineage of the restaurant operating. While we'd love for everyone to make as much as possible with a guaranteed minimum, the end result is the domino effect of having to raise prices across the board, which then pushes, some friction or resistance to your customers.
As of 2023, only 7 states have eliminated the sub-minimum wage. Saru Jayaraman is the founder and president of One Fair Wage.
You know what's so funny? I'm going to break it down tomorrow, and I forgot about it, and I need to actually write that down. Over in California, they just signed a new thing to where the cost of even being able to get a fast food burger, because the fast food workers are going to be making an egregious amount of money, and even McDonald's saying that it's going to add at least another $250,000 in costs onto whatever it is that they're doing. But we're going to get to that tomorrow.
An organization seeking to end all sub-minimum wages in the country and increase the sustainability of wages and working conditions in the service sector.
These states actually have the same, or in many cases, higher restaurant industry business growth, small business growth rates, job growth rates in the restaurant industry, people of color own business rates, women of color own business rates.
What is women of color own business rate? What is people of color own business? Honestly, as a C student, maybe she just has a better grip on what economics are as far as what's going on within these businesses. I've never heard of people of color business rates. I don't even know what she's talking about right now, but let me see a little bit more before I speak on it.
And tipping averages than the rest of the country.
The nation's third largest city and foodie capital, Chicago, is the latest to make the move.
Shout out to Chicago.
And so is the definition of a tipped worker. An employee engaged in an occupation in which they customarily and regularly receive more than $30 a month in tips. Nowadays, that's a lot of people. And consumers aren't responding positively to this shift. In the second quarter of 2023, tipping at full-service restaurants fell to the lowest level since the start of the pandemic.
Yep.
I don't think people realize how impactful that tip can be solely because they're so accustomed to tipping everywhere now. That's going to hurt businesses. That's going to hurt people.
And it's funny because everywhere I go, it's a tip jar out there. Now, I don't agree with tipping everywhere. But again, everywhere I go, there's a tip jar out there, and everybody is telling you what it is that you can and you can't do. Everybody is, tip jar, how much do you want to tip? They turn it at you. Make sure that you give me this amount of money, so on and so forth. But basically, I just wanted to break down exactly what the business principles are so people can make a more informed decision as to not whether or not they want to embrace that part of the culture or not. I'm not telling people what they should do. I'm just giving you the insight and information on what happens and what the true success rate of most businesses are and why they fail, because people do not truly do the math of what it takes in order to be successful, and they don't understand the finances aspect of it. You can make the best barbecue. You can have the best food. It could be absolutely awesome. But let me tell you something. It does not necessarily translate into success.